One of the conversations going on now is the renewables. While the price of PMS hits the roof, alternative has been offered for renewables. Talking about gas in this instance in Nigeria, CNG and the LCCI, that's the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, they're adding their voice to this, calling for the adoption of renewable, especially CNG, as a way to accelerate industrialization in the country. They say it is cheaper, more economical, and it should be affordable in due course.
Dangote just bought 1,000 CNG trucks, and it's a beginning. I don't know how CNG will be in the private cars, in the small cars, but definitely when you talk about trucks, transport, heavy vehicle, heavy equipment, CNG is there and is very, very good. Some people don't like it, like the drivers, because it's not so easy to take CNG out of the truck. One thing is environmental, another thing is practical and economical. Nigeria has so much gas and it should be utilized. This energy can also be used for creating more electric power. And I think, well, in my country, Norway, we have about 90% of the cars now sold are electric cars. This would also be good for Nigeria. Being CNG, being electric, being whatever it is, we need energy.
All right, so that's it. I'm still talking about energy security in Nigeria. Well, I wonder if this is good news. The story that the importation of PMS has reduced in the country. We had that story yesterday. Perhaps it is, well, it's what's connected to the operations of Dangote refinery. But are more people adopting CNG and other alternatives? I wonder. But what does it mean, actually? What are the implications as S&P Global Commodity Insights have reported that there's been a major drop in importation the first week of October? They say there's a weekly drop, a weekly average of 1.3 million is what was recorded in August. And meanwhile, for October, it's less than even a million. Let's talk about the implications of this with an oil and gas expert. Joins us right here in the studio. Dr. Wisdom Enang is right here. Dr. Enang, good morning and thank you for your time.
Hi, good morning, Guinea. Thank you very much.
Yes, I think what jumps out from the story that we are now importing less petrol is that we now need less FX. But then, do we have other detrimental consequences that could come with this?
I mean, I think it's a win-win for us that we're now importing less petrol. We're producing, because at the end of the day, if you look at the entire petroleum value chain, you have just 20% for the upstream, and then you have the midstream, the downstream, and the gas sectors accounting for about 80%. And what that means is, and this is what South Korea does, they take crude from Nigeria, for example, refine it, and they're able to harness the 80% of the value chain. That way they're able to provide jobs for their people. They're able to industrialize, because industrialization has a direct correlation with consumption of energy. So, in fact, what you find is that it's a very good thing. But the numbers that are being reeled out kind of test some of the realities that we thought we knew. The first is, when you look at how much we're importing now at the moment, we are importing about, say, 44.6 million liters of PMS on a weekly basis, according to the data that we have just mentioned. And then what we also find is that that translates to about 6.5 million liters per day of consumption. The Dangote on the other side are able to pull out between, let's say 15, which is the minimum they were going to start, million liters per day, to 25. We don't know where they are exactly, but within that space. But even if we add 25 to 6, that's about 31, right? And the country isn't blowing off. Then how did we arrive at Nigeria's consumption being 50 million liters a day?
And doesn't that bring in the question of the smuggling around the border?
That's the point I'm trying to make. Which is why Dangote had said himself that with the technology that we have. So basically, when you set up barriers for against all of this stuff, you're setting up the equipment barrier, you're setting up the process barrier, and the people barrier. And so it said, with the technology we have, we'll be able to tell Nigeria's exact consumption. Meaning that when I add those numbers, even with the worst case of the best case of 25 million liters, plus what we're importing at the moment, 6.5, you find out that you're about 31.5. How does that translate to 50 million liters as quoted by the NMDPRA? Meaning that we need a lot of clarity on our actual consumption, because that's the basis for our macroeconomic planning for the downstream sector.
I guess that's why IPMAN say they now have a task force that's supposed to take care of smuggling and vandalism, and I wonder if they can cope with it, because it seems to be a very technical and expert-driven illegal business in the
Exactly.
country.
It's quite a very large cartel that does all of that. But I think my biggest worry is when we look at the impact of all of those on pricing, right? There are people that feel so. I kind of juggle two sort of pricing regimes on my head. The pricing regime that gives us the true value of industrializing the economy, consuming our own crude, which should be less than the imported variant of the PMS, right? However, some people say, well, smuggling will still happen except you make sure the price outside is exactly the price inside. So the question I have on my mind is, we're not actually paying for just the price of the commodity or the cost of producing and then making some profits. We're paying to make sure it's at parity with other places so that we don't have smuggling. But that's paying for I would like to, for lack of a better word, negligence.
So how do we compensate the consumers who are paying for that negligence?
I think the payment should even happen in this first instance, because this is when we should strip out we should look at the entire value chain. What is eating our lunch on this value chain, and then who is responsible for all of those, and then find out where are the areas. Right, fine, we've tried to liberate the market, and we're getting on just fine. We've gone to a point where we've gone from monopsony to where we allow the petroleum marketers approach the Dangote refinery and strike a deal directly. So it's a work in progress.
But has that started in reality?
No, I mean, there's still negotiations going on.
Yeah, okay.
Right?
I just wanted to be sure.
There's still negotiations
status
going on. And then we're moving slowly, but there's still something eating our lunch. The petroleum value chain isn't just about off-taking. It's also making sure you minimize the losses and make sure that we are able to consolidate those gains for the Nigerian people.
Is there a way to handle this smuggling? I know that there are devices that are supposed to be put on trucks, so it monitors when a truck has offloaded, where it's offloaded. I mean, we know of these devices, but I guess using it to actually track this becomes a wheel of the people.
Correct. So, like I laid out before, we have three critical barriers: the people barrier, which is the most important because the people barrier control the process and the equipment barrier. And then we have the equipment barrier, which of course technology and all of those equipments play a very big role. And then we have the process barrier, which talks about what happens when and who does what. That is really important. I think we need to segregate them and begin to define things. The other thing is that when we're looking at stitching all of this together, I like to recommend a PDRR method, which I call predict, detect, respond, and recover. Right? The predict is using all of those technology and making sure that you're able to, for example, if you're taking a consignment somewhere, we should know where each liter was taken out and at which point. There's technology for that.
Who's supposed to monitor that? Even if we have the technology, I mean, it's just like putting a CCTV in your house. Somebody has to follow up and watch the visuals and be able to take action.
And that's always the thing. I mean, for me, what I'll be thinking, if I was thinking for the government, is set up a special task force for that, because I think that's
extra expenses.
But the benefits are worth it. We're talking about energy security. It's very important. It's the basis for even the functionality of our society today. So it's very important. And then when you go from the predict standpoint, you're able to get that data. You're able to mine the data and detect. So, for example, if a truck is out, maybe going on the road and it stops for an hour, is it because the truck has broken down, or is it because there's actually an active move to evacuate some of the inventory there for smuggling purposes? And then you go to the respond. that's where you have the human interface. That's where people begin to, after looking at data, what do we need to do? Do we get in touch with the driver? Is there a secondary protocol that would check what the primary protocol had done and make sure, or detected, and make sure that everything is fine? And then there's the recover approach. When you're talking about recover, you're talking about making sure that you send a signal to people that this is not acceptable. That starts with naming and shaming. That starts with making sure that even when they're brought to justice, that justice actually prevails. And that's speaking directly to our judiciary.
Well, I mean, I don't want to go there because we see what's going on in the political scene with the judiciary. So, I mean, adding this there, I don't know, what to expect. And it's really a sad one because what it does is it strips the common man of hope.
Absolutely.
Of things being done the way they should be done.
Yeah, I think just to speak to that, my biggest worry is the way we represent things, right? I hear people talk about the competitiveness of the market simply because we're now having, these suppliers of PMS go on to negotiate with the Dangote refinery. And that I hear people class that as being creating a competitive market. And I worry. And the reason is this. The people that are going there to be some of these petroleum marketers are actually not, what they're doing basically is not creating their own demand. They are reflecting Nigeria's demand, right? So the demand curve stays basically the same way, and then the supply curve stays basically the same way. So there's really, that doesn't class as a competitive market. A competitive market will be where there are options, for example, the CNG option, and I can choose whichever option I want to use. And so there's an interaction of demand moving up and down depending on what I feel is more convenient. And then right now in our homes, we make that decision between the electric cooker and the gas, depending on which one we work out the tariff to be cheaper. And then you find out, and then on the supply end, we also have more refineries, and they're coming on with their own playbook. Some of them are coming at different pricing, and that's possible because if you think about a refinery that is solely a refinery that is getting inputs from feedstock from other sources, and a refinery that has its own field, right? They can afford to say, okay, well, let's discount our downstream operations because we're making a lot of profits on the upstream, and that could affect their pricing. When we have that sort of interaction between that sort of demand and the sort of supply that I talked about, then we can have a very competitive market.
Do you see that happening with Dangote? I mean, they said from first quarter of next year, they'll be getting their own crude.
Well, but I saw the numbers, and the numbers is 20,000 barrels per day, roughly, to start. That doesn't scratch it versus the 650,000 barrels per day sort of production capacity. But it's a good start. But I think by the time they reach maybe getting a field of about an expense of fields worth 200,000 barrels, then we could play around with numbers. Because I'll give you a case study. Companies like the Watersmith refinery, for example, that have their own fields, have been able to, Watersmith that have their own fields, have been able to work in that space comfortably because they also take credit for the profits that they make in the upstream sector.
But in all of this, I think, are we now totally deregulated? Would we wake up one day and say, oh, we want to remove another part of subsidy, and so we expect the price to move again?
So for me, basically, I think subsidy, well, the pricing staying constant, right, are hinged on a number of factors. Some are internal, some are external. For example, the war happening, well, the crisis between Israel, Lebanon, and Iran is one of the things that can shift us, because if the price of crude goes up, obviously the pricing needs to go up. Then the internal thing is we need to think about the exchange rates, right? It drives everything. And when I told people, say, well, if we're not importing, how does that drive? It still drives everything. Because think about it, the original investment was done in dollars. The benchmark of the expected return on investment is done in dollars. And so without your knowledge, you're actually paying an extra component of the pricing to ensure that there's an adequate return for investors. There's
even the crude. Crude is priced in dollars.
Of course.
Even when you're buying it domestic.
Correct, absolutely.
So, I mean, that still fits into it.
That's all still in addition to other factors externally that increase the price of crude.
So it doesn't look like subsidy is gone, right?
it's momentarily gone. Could be because if you look at the pricing, you could see when Naira naira was about 750, for example, at some point it was gone. But when the exchange rate went again up to 1,000, it was back in.
Yeah,
Because
but it creates a lot of uncertainty for economy, for investors,
Yeah.
because you don't know which way to go. If we know that subsidy is gone,
Yeah.
so whenever we see that the price of crude is down, we can expect it to reflect, although over time,
Yeah.
because we do know that, I mean, crude is purchased in contract months, I think at least 2 months
Yes,
or
it is.
so,
Yes.
So, but when you do not know when there'll be government intervention or none, then, I mean,
It is a very
plans.
tough one. The lack of clarity is giving the people headache, is also giving investors headache. So there's a lot of uncertainty around communication, around what is going on. And are we just running a deterministic government where we clearly know what we're doing? Or are we running a stochastic and reactive government where we're just waiting for things to happen and then we react to it? That's also one of the biggest problems that we have.
Perhaps the government feels that the society is not mature enough to handle the hard information.
No, I think so. So for me, I think that's maybe one of the factors. But I think my biggest worry is just understanding. So what is the economic model? Is it a realist model? Is it an optimist model? Because if you're operating an optimist model, then you think everything is good. And I say that with reasons. We floated the naira, and then just for about 2 hours, the exchange rate on the on the official window was worse off than the exchange rate in the black market at that time. And then I saw a release, and they were celebrating that has happened. Like, it's too soon, right? It's too soon to call it and try to make sense of what's going on. So essentially, I think the government needs to come to a point where there is clarity in terms of communication, and then we also are rejigging our techniques based on the realities on ground. Yes, austerity measures are very important for the kind of economy that we run to get back, but we need to balance that with the realities of the country and make sure that we are not losing sight of what it really means to survive in these times as a Nigerian.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Wisdom, and an oil and gas expert, for your time and
Thank
views.
you.